So, Just Mercy is based on the book about Bryan Stevenson, the attorney for death row inmates, and in particular his case with Walter McMillian. Based on a true story, obviously. Now, the way that this film is set up, it feels like there are big themes about racial injustice, and deep contemplation on the death penalty, as well as like a little bit of the questioning of of suitable punishment, as well as contemplating how mental health might play into it as well. But for the most part, it maintains a strict focus. The film runs about almost 2.5 hours, and it maintains a strict focus on Walter McMillian's case. Now, this is both the best and the worst part of the film, because the fact that we remain firmly on this case, it holds our attention. It means that we're looking at this and we're paying attention to all the little details of it, and it actually gets us interested in it and has us questioning the justice system as it goes along. At the same time, though, we focus so much on this trial that there doesn't really feel much of like a lot of room for much of anything else. Like in particular, Michael B. Jordan plays the role of Bryan Stevenson, and we really don't get to know much about him outside of just his drive to be a kind of like pro bono attorney for death row inmates. Like we see him briefly chat with his mother, who's not really that into him going off, to help people in Alabama. But for the most part, we're just seeing him with inmates and with other people trying to focus on this case, and trying to get these people off of death row. Not so maybe not so much to prove their innocence, but just to keep them off of death row because he views the death penalty as immoral. Which is there's a lot of great questioning within that. But like I said, it's mostly focused on the one case with Walter McMillian. Which is interesting because at the same time, he's also taken on all these other cases from all these different prisoners. But for the most part, yeah, we're following Walter, who's played by Jamie Foxx here. They established that in 1987, Walter was just driving home, and then he was accused of a murder that he says he has nothing to do with. But there wasn't like sufficient enough evidence to suggest that that he didn't do it. But then, as Stevenson keeps digging and he keeps finding witnesses and evidence that's been buried, he quickly realizes that, wait a minute, a lot of this doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense that he would be here at this time based on these testimonies that apparently weren't really considered. And then he quickly realized that, wait a minute, it's because there's a bit of like injustice within Alabama here, within their law enforcement. And here's the thing, this film is kind of set up to be a easily digestible type of courtroom drama from that aspect. Like it brings up aspects of the justice system that that bring out this racial prejudice, and it actually brings up like there's quite a lot to consider with this type of case. But it feels like, it just kind of goes for like a lot of the easy scenes and the easy answers. And now to a degree, I like the fact that it whips it up this way so that it's fairly easy for most audiences. Like if you're not familiar with this case, it's fairly easy to come into this film a little bit cold and kind of get, mostly like the bare bones facts from this and come away with it thinking like, wow, what a story. And it brought up a lot that I got to think about within the criminal justice system. But it feels like there should be a little bit more here, especially for a film that runs about 2.5 hours. You'd expect it to take its time and maybe explore some of these deeper features. Like I'm not saying like, I mentioned this a little bit, but I'm not saying that Bryan Stevenson, they had to like set up this whole other subplot for him that that dug a little bit more into his past. It would have been nice. But like I feel like there's a little bit more that could be considered and contemplated on in between this mad dash to get the evidence, to get the appeal, to get these witnesses to talk, to basically get involved with all these trials to make sure that Walter McMillian is not sentenced to a death for something he didn't do. I kind of like how the film kind of uses this for its length, but I like how it kind of like it shows how long and drawn out the process is. Like Walter McMillian, he was arrested in 1987, and he didn't get released and dropped of all these charges until about the mid 90s. In fact, even later in the film, they show another inmate who didn't get, who was at the same time, he was incarcerated as Walter, but he wasn't proven innocent and got off death row until much, much later, just like a few years ago. It was around the time he actually got off there. So there's a lot to consider here. One of the most interesting performances I found. There's a lot of performances here that are pretty great. Michael B. Jordan does great as sort of like this stern attorney who maintains face even in like the face of racial prejudice. Like you just expect him to just get so mad that he'll just like break out, but he keeps himself fairly contained. I like that Jamie Foxx has that great level of kind of like, that desperation and contemplation on his face about what he's done and what the system has done to him and how much he misses his family. Great emotional performance out of him. Brie Larson is kind of unrecognizable, at least for me. At least she was, as Ava Ansley, who's kind of like the sidekick of Bryan Stevenson, helping along with the with kind of like the pro bono death row cases. She kind of helps him out along the way. You kind of see like their business evolve too over the course of the film, which is actually pretty neat. But I think probably one of the most standout performances is Rob Morgan, who plays Herbert Richardson, who was a veteran who had PTSD, and because of that, he actually built a bomb that ended up killing a girl, and he feels like he needs to be in there, like, because he doesn't really remember too much of it, but they suspect that his PTSD was what led him to that, and he felt horrible about it. So like he believes that he keeps saying like I belong here, I deserve death, and everyone is just saying, no man, you have PTSD, this is a problem that really needs to be addressed, like you shouldn't be in prison, you should be in a hospital. But he's not in a hospital, he's on death row, and unfortunately probably one of the most tragic parts of the film is that Stevenson can't get him off, and he has to end up going to the chair. And of all the scenes they have here that could go for the easy melodrama, his scene of his execution is actually probably one of the most chilling, and I think the most emotionally effective. Like a lot of scenes here feel fairly manipulative, to get the audience to basically, either sigh and discuss or just, cheer and clap, and they build this film up as a big audience pleaser so that by the time we get to the inevitable dismissal of charges and release of Walter, plenty of people in the theater were clapping at that, because they build it up to really get the audience engaged in it. But yeah, Rob Morgan's performance was actually, I actually really dug his performance the most. Tim Blake Nelson is also all right. I mean, he's kind of like, it kind of seems like he's hamming the southern accent up a little bit, which I find kind of weird, because Tim Blake Nelson feels like a guy who could do a natural type of southerner, but he's supposed to be playing, a fairly meek prisoner who could be like easily coerced into basically anything as long as you give him candy and soda. So he's kind of all the roles, like it feels like Tim Blake Nelson's is kind of hamming his up a little bit too much in that area. But outside of that, he's okay. I mean, it's Tim Blake Nelson. He never comes off too embarrassing. But for the most part, I think Rob Morgan kind of steals the show here, followed very closely by Jamie Foxx. I kind of feel like I almost wish the film was a little bit more dense, because in terms of addressing the legal system and racial prejudice, it kind of feels fairly light in how like I said, easily digestible for most audiences here, where I kind of wish it was a lot more dense and got into like more of like the little like the very tiny aspects of of court proceedings and trying to get someone off of death row. I would have liked if they focused on that a little bit more. At the same time, I would have also liked if they had more of a deeper contemplation and consideration around the era and everything within the system that led to this injustice. So it's a little bit disappointing. in that it didn't quite give me that out of this film, but for what it wants to be, it essentially wants to be, more of like an audience pleaser of a courtroom drama, and for the most part it delivers on it. I kind of wish there was a little bit more character here and a little bit more of a focus on the bigger themes, but for what it's trying to be as kind of like, a courtroom case that really gets you involved and really gets you thinking about, the injustices, of the American legal system. I think the film serves its purpose fairly well here. I will say this though. The film ends with, you expect this from a lot of like, true story films. They pretty much all do this, where they always end and they have the epilogue where they tell you what really happened, to the main characters, and, and basically, and a few blurbs here about the justice system, and lets you know a little bit more about the people involved in their careers. They address the main characters in the epilogue just before the credits. But here's the thing. As the credits keep rolling, they have like kind of like mid-credit kind of like Easter eggs where they reveal what happened to other people in this story. And what they reveal in the mid-credit sequence is more unsettling. It's like, they just save the parts right before the credits, to say like, oh, thank goodness, what a hopeful way to end a picture. But then as the credits keep going, like if you stay, that hope will be dashed when you hear like, the more horrific stuff that they bring up about, the more antagonistic people involved. You're kind of like, ooh, yeah, I could see why the audience was like leaving while this stuff was coming up. And I'm like, ooh, I kind of would have liked to see their reaction to that as well. But for what the film is, it essentially, kind of makes it like an easily digestible story for, revealing Bryan Stevenson and Walter McMillian. And I think, at least on that aspect, if it inspires people to go out and learn more about this type of stuff and maybe pick up the book by Stevenson, I think, I think the film kind of serves its purpose. I just wish it had just a little bit more. So for Just Mercy, 3 out of 5 stars.